Welcome to today's episode. Today is super exciting because we're going to be showing you how to make kombucha. I first had kombucha, it was sometime between 2006 and 2008, and I was doing a piercing apprenticeship under a guy named John Johnson, who's still in the piercing industry. And John was making kombucha in his refrigerator at the time. Actually, I don't know if he was making it in his refrigerator. He had some homemade kombucha in his refrigerator. That was the first time I had it. When was the first time you had kombucha?
I think when I was in middle school, my mom used to make it, and that was the first time I had it, and it was disgusting. Tasted like vinegar.
By the way, well, maybe she was making it wrong then, if it was vinegary.
Well, I think it was vinegary to me because I'd never had it. It was like it was like the tartness, you know? And they drink it like plain, because back then, like, there weren't many flavors of kombucha.
Sure.
So it wasn't like now.
Yeah, also, I mean, I guess it is vinegary in general.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's fun. That's fun facts. By the way, we found out that Tashina has tonsillitis. So that's why she's still got such a bad cough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hope you feel better soon.
Thank you, me too.
You're welcome. Okay, there are a couple different ways to make kombucha. Every single way requires what we call a SCOBY, which is the little thing that you see floating on top here. Mine's a little gross looking because one of my tea bags exploded, and so there's like loose tea in there, which really shouldn't be in there. And then also, I had let it go for a really long time, so it developed a second one. So you can see it kind of on the side here.
Oh, is that what that is?
Yeah, because I basically, when I transferred it to this jar, I just poured it all in. So the SCOBY's got all mixed up and kind of gross looking and all sort of cattywampus, if you will. So when you make it, it'll actually look kind of nice and flat and white and not so messed up.
It'll look kind of like a mushroom pancake in a way.
Yeah, like a mushroom pancake. Regardless of how you make it, you need a SCOBY. So there are ways to get the SCOBY. You can buy them online. You can buy a kombucha kit. But honestly, you don't need to buy that. You really don't need to. You can make it at home, and we're going to show you how to make the SCOBY and then the kombucha that comes from it. So, should we jump into ingredients?
Yeah.
Okay. Alright, because Tashina is not feeling well because of the tonsillitis, she's not going to be in the rest of this video. She's going to rest her voice. So, let's get into ingredients and what you need. Okay, one thing you're going to need is 500 milliliters, or roughly 2 cups of filtered water. The reason you want to use filtered water is because if you're using water from your faucet, sometimes city water can have like a lot of chlorine or other stuff in it, and that can inhibit the growth of microbes and bacteria, which is why it's there. However, for our purposes, we want microbes and bacteria to grow because that is going to be the premise of our kombucha. You're gonna need tea. You can use green tea or black tea, but don't use herbal tea because herbal teas tend not to actually have real tea in them. It tends to be a mix of like, I don't know, like flowers and aromatic plants and stuff like that, which is all great and delicious, but for our purposes, we need actual tea. This is like fancy organic tea. You don't really need it to be that fancy, but I don't know, whenever I'm making something that's fermented, I like to go organic because it just makes me feel a little bit better. I don't know that it's that big a deal. Get yourself a green tea or a black tea. This is actually jasmine green, so it is organic green tea scented with organic jasmine flower. I doubt that flavor's really going to come through at the end. When you're actually making your kombucha, not just the SCOBY, is when the flavoring of the tea is going to have a bigger impact. So, tea, and then oh, by the way, you don't need to put it in this big of a jar. This is a 2-liter or 8-cup mason jar. The reason I'm doing it in here is because later, once my SCOBY's developed, I'll just be able to add everything else into this, like in a couple weeks, and I won't have to transfer it into another jar. So you can definitely start with a smaller jar. It's not necessary to have one this big. Speaking of the jar, you want to have the ring for it, and then you're going to want to have a piece of cloth, like this is just an old piece of a t-shirt, because that's going to go over there, and then you can either rubber band it or you can use this ring to seal it because you do want there to be airflow. I would not suggest using something like cheesecloth just because I think it's a little too porous and you don't want like fruit flies or anything to actually be able to get into your kombucha. Sugar, you're not going to need this much sugar. You're going to need about 2 tablespoons right now. And then kombucha, what we're going to do is we're going to take this kombucha, which has a little bit of the like boogery kind of like bacteria, kind of like what I like to think of as like a SCOBY baby. We're gonna basically take that and we're gonna grow that into the SCOBY, which is why I like to go with GTs and the like original, no flavor, like nothing to it. The ingredients here are black tea, green tea, cane sugar, which is, you know, pretty much the same ingredients that we're gonna be using here. And obviously their kombucha culture is one of the ingredients too. This is the one that you have to be 21 and over to purchase. The reason I like to use this one when I'm making kombucha is because I feel like it's the most pure form of kombucha that you can get store-bought. But you don't have to use the 21 and over one. You can use another one. It'll be fine. The whole point, I think, of starting to do this kind of stuff at home is to like experiment with it and get an idea of what you are having fun doing and what works for you and all that sort of thing. Let's get into the actual making process. What we're going to do first is I'm going to boil this water and I'm going to brew some tea in here. So let me get this water hot. Alright, so I've got my tea bags, and if I keep them out of the rim here, they're not going to reach the water, so I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to drop them in there. Alright, and now I'm going to go ahead and pour 2 cups or 500 milliliters of boiling water into this. And we're gonna let that steep for about 10 minutes. Okay, so it's been about 10 minutes. I'm going to take the tea bags out of here using my cooking chopsticks. I'm gonna actually kind of like squeeze the juice out of these as I pull them out. And then the next step is to add, the next step is to add sugar. So I'm gonna add 2 tablespoons of sugar, and then I'm going to dissolve that into, put a little more in there. I'm going to dissolve that into the tea to make sort of a sweet tea mixture. And like I mentioned before, I like to use organic ingredients for making kombucha, so that was an organic sugar. Obviously you could tell by the color that it's not like a overly bleached or processed sugar as well. I think that as much as we can leave in the sort of like naturalness of the ingredients when it comes to making fermented beverages like kombucha or ginger beer or anything like that, similar to like when you're making your sourdough starter for sourdough bread, I just think that it helps a lot with the process. It helps speed things up, and yeah, I just think it's better. Also, you'll notice that I'm using my chopsticks again to whisk this. I always hear that you shouldn't use metal when you're making kombucha and that sort of thing, and I'm not really entirely sure why that is, but I definitely adhere to it. Okay, so now that the sugar is really well dissolved into the tea, and basically what we've made here is just a really sweet tea. So now that that's done is the fun part. This is the fun part because this is where we really add in the kombucha that's going to make the difference. I would say pour in the entire bottle, but if you want to drink a little bit of it, it's probably okay to do. So I'm going to actually pour out a little bit for myself. Delishy. Also, just a quick side note, you do want to let your sweet tea mixture cool down to about room temperature before you add that bottle of kombucha in. The reason for that is that if it's too hot, it will kill your kombucha bacteria, and that can obviously have a big impact. Now, typically, obviously, you don't want to shake kombucha because it's effervescent and you're gonna get a big explosion. But I am shaking it up because I want to make sure that I get all the stuff that's settled on the bottom I probably could have done this more gently by just rolling it, and I'm sure that would have worked as well. But I don't really want to wait for that, so shake it up a little bit. Oh, now it's gonna make a mess. Now I have to wait anyway. Okay, so now I'm pouring the kombucha into my sweet tea mix. And you might see in some of these shots, especially in some of those ones when we get to the bottom and you see the foam, that some of the chunks of that kind of like baby SCOBY start to come out. And that's exactly what we want in there, because that's what's gonna grow into our main SCOBY. And if you look, see stuck to my chopstick there, we have some of that SCOBY dangling off. But I don't want to take that out. I want that to stay in there, so I'm gonna carefully make sure that stays inside. And when you do this, you might even be able to look at the bottom of yours and see some of the floaties. I actually don't really see any in mine, but I'm sure it's in there. I was just stirring it. Actually, you can kind of see it in the top. So if I put my cell phone under there, you can kind of see some of the floaties floating around. Not just the foam, but the actual pieces of kombucha that are going to grow into the SCOBY. So that's really exciting. Pretty stoked on that. Okay, so that's pretty much it for that part of the process. The only thing really to do now is to cover this and wait. So you're going to wait about 1 to 3 weeks. You can wait up to 6 weeks, especially if it's cold in your house, if it's winter time. But if nothing's happened by 6 weeks, okay, so do you see that? You see the little floaties in there? That's pretty exciting. I love the little floaties. I can't wait for those to grow. If nothing's happened in 6 weeks, then you probably did something wrong. You need to toss it and start over. Also, just kind of a pro tip, when you're letting it sit for the 1 to 2 weeks, try not to pick it up and move it around, because the more you slosh it around, the harder it's going to be for the SCOBY to form, because it's going to start as a really thin layer, like just a real thin kind of like white transparent like film across the top of your kombucha. So if you're picking it up and looking at it every day, you might shake that around, and that could definitely slow down the time it takes for your SCOBY or your mother to grow. Once you have that SCOBY developed, then it's time for the next step. And that next step is honestly basically the same exact thing. It's just that you're going to do more water and more sugar. Again, the ratios don't need to be exact, but what I like to do is brew a stronger tea. Like I would probably use maybe up to 6 tea bags if I'm gonna fill this all the way up to the top. Remember, we only use 2 for this amount, but I want it to probably have a stronger taste, so I'm going to use about 6 tea bags, and I would probably put like a full cup of sugar in this. So what I would do is I would make that separate, that sweet tea mixture, and then I would gently pour it into here, or you could start it in a whole other container and just pull the SCOBY out of this and put it into that new container with a little bit of this liquid, and then you could drink what's left over if you wanted to. There are a lot of ways to do it. It's not an exact science. Once you have that all going with your fully formed SCOBY and it's sitting in the jar, and you're gonna let it, eat the sugar and kind of ferment, and then you'll start to see that it gets a little bit effervescent, and then you can kind of start to taste it and give it a go. If you don't want to stick metal in there, you can use like a food-safe plastic to dip it in there and give it a taste and see how it's coming along. If it's super vinegary, you've gone too far. It went bad. If it's still really sweet and syrupy and not really like effervescent or carbonated at all, then that's because it needs more time. Like maybe it's really cold in your house, or it's just not eating the sugar fast enough. That being said, obviously you want to regulate the temperature a little bit. Like I wouldn't put it outside. I also would be careful not to put it right under a vent in your house. Like I had some stuff under the vent here, and then I started to notice that it was messing with my fermentations, because it would be really cold and then really warm and then really cold and really warm. So I just it's still in the same room, maybe only 10 feet from where they were, but they're not right under the vent anymore, and that seems to be helping. I love kombucha. It's delightful. It's so much less expensive than buying it from the store. Obviously, you know, a bottle of kombucha might be $3 or $4, as where once you have the SCOBY going, then you're really just paying for tea and sugar. So it's pretty simple, pretty great way to make it. I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you make it or if you have any questions. I will obviously answer all the questions I can in the comments below. And yeah, thanks for watching. Subscribe, I guess, if you want to. If you don't want to, that's fine too.